Marco Codes! Hi folks, Marco here and welcome back to our Google Photos clone series. Let's talk a bit about testing today. Why? Well, when you think back to last episode, we wrote some code, some Java code that spawns ImageMagick processes to convert images to thumbnails. The thing is, it worked perfectly on my machine, and then we uploaded the code to my NAS and everything just exploded. No, what is that? It really only worked on my machine. Now, what was the problem? The problem is that different ImageMagick versions have different commands you need to call to convert thumbnails. What a bummer. And this actually brings us to the whole topic of testing because yes, we spawn these processes and imagine, yeah, we call the right commands. But how do we test that a thumbnail got created? It is the correct image, not just a random image of a cat. It has the right size, the right aspect ratio, and that finally it works on every combination of every operating system and ImageMagick version. I'm feeling already a bit dizzy. Well, let's not despair and tackle all these questions with some good old pragmatic testing. Alright, so far our skeleton project only consists of one app class. There's not even JUnit available. Let's change that and quickly go to our pom.xml file. I'm going to paste in two dependencies, and fear not if you now think, oh Marco, why do you start with this boring stuff? Because people who are used to, for example, having Spring Boot pulling in 50 million dependencies, for them it's a huge revelation to see that for JUnit to work, you only need one tiny dependency, JUnit Jupyter. And I always like to pull in SRJ as well, because I like to use the SRJ assertions more than the basic JUnit ones, but that's all you need to have, right? So back to our app class here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new test class with a keyboard shortcut. You can see the keyboard shortcuts at the bottom of the screen. Yes, it's going to be JUnit 5 app test in the package, right? I'm going to click OK. And then IntelliJ was smart enough to just, create that app class here. Now, I don't want to use the default JUnit assertions. We'll take care of that in a second with the SRJ ones. And ideally, I'd like to write a test which is something like thumbnail creation works. Right. Now, I personally like to have these underscores. When I work with plain JUnit, I like to have these underscores in the method names, but choose whatever floats your boat. And in the end, we need to, call ImageMagick here or app class, which spawns the ImageMagick processes. But then we need to think about, how would we actually test that this spawning of the processes worked? There's something else we have to take care of before that. If you just, if I had that perfect test, I checked it in, you cloned it onto your machine, executed it without having ImageMagick installed, you would just get, an error message saying whatever, couldn't spawn process. In fact, we need a test before that. And that test should ideally be something like ImageMagick is installed, right? Not only should it come before the thumbnail creation works test, it should ideally also disable it if ImageMagick is not installed, and we'll take care of that later on in another section. But for now, the question is, how would we actually check that ImageMagick is installed? Well, I'm just going to write a test, and you know me by now, I write stuff from top to bottom without the stuff even existing. So I want to assert that app detect ImageMagick version. So I'm just imagining there's going to be, a method like this. I'm just going to quickly create it and say for now, even though it's bogus, it's going to return a string. So, it can return string or null or whatever, blah. And back in our test, make sure the import is right here. Choose assert_j. And then we're going to go with something like is equal to something, right? This is the test, and now we need to actually figure out, because strings, returning strings is a bit nonsensical, we need to actually figure out how would the ImageMagick version be detected, and what do we want to return here instead of a string. All right, so how are we going to figure out if ImageMagick is indeed installed? Well, simple. We're going to call magick -- version, for example, and if the command succeeds, meaning there's a process exit code of 0, and this nice little text here, then we can assume that ImageMagick is installed in version 7, by the way. If I did the same thing on my NAS, you would see that magick -- version doesn't work. And that's because you have to call a different command, convert directly, because ImageMagick is in version 6.9 here. By the way, if you try to do convert -- version Windows, Ooh, it gives you back invalid drive specification because it's actually a different command on Windows, has nothing to do with ImageMagick. So we'll need to do something about this. Back in our app class, let's do something. We saw we had two ImageMagick versions, 6 point something and 7 point something. And actually, in fact, these are the two major versions which are out there. We don't have to care about 5 for older versions, whatnot. So we're going to do something like public enum ImageMagick version. In fact, I'll tell you what, we're not going to do ImageMagick version. We're going to call it version directly. For now, we're going to say not available. We're going to say I am 6, ImageMagick 6, and ImageMagick 7. And I'm going to create a new class. It should be outside of my app class, but for now, to not have to switch back and forth so much, I'm just going to put it in here. I'm going to call it ImageMagick, right? I'm going to move my version in here. And then also, by the way, I'm just going to move detect ImageMagick version also inside here. And I'm going to do it with a refactoring, right, so that my test code is updated as well. So now we have this ImageMagick class. And by the way, if you already thought, Marco, why the hell did you write a static method? Ooh. Well, you can do simple. Don't freak out. What you do is you do convert to, there's an action in IntelliJ, convert to instance method, right? You just say refactor and boom, that's it. Now you can see that new ImageMagick. You just need to get the import right. And IntelliJ replaced my static method call to the one to ImageMagick. And now, by the way, yes, what we can do is I'll just also move the class quickly outside to the upper level, right? So now we have app and ImageMagick, and now everyone should be happy so far. We're not going to return a string anymore. We're going to return the version here, right? For now, we're just going to say, well, the version is going to be not available. And the test is simply going to be ImageMagick is installed whenever we assert that the new ImageMagick, detect ImageMagick version is not equal to version.na. When we run this test now, obviously it's going to fail and we need to fix our implementation now. Tell me by now what we need is some good old code duplication. So let me just try and get this code here, which calls magic convert. And by the way, we need to move that method to our ImageMagick class in a second as well. But for now, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a method called run with a list of strings as a command. You'll see what that is in a second. Let me just paste the code in here first. Ideally, what we want to do is we want to say that down here in detect ImageMagick version, we want to call run with, for example, magic, then -- version like so. We're going to get the program's exit code back, right? And if the exit code equals 0, then we simply want to return version.ImageMagick 7, right? Like so. And we have to do the same thing for version 6 and whatnot. Now, a list of strings actually doesn't make sense, so we're just going to go like so. And we're going to put the commands in here. Inherit IO is fine. We're going to start the process. We're going to wait at most 1 second, right? Because a -- version shouldn't even take 1 second. And we're going to return process.exit value, like so. And for now, I'm just going to throw the exceptions right in the method signature, which means all of this we're going to run into a big try catch block. And every exception that is being thrown for now, we're just going to ignore for now. And we'll just say, well, the version is going to be not available. We actually took a tiny shortcut because now we just run magic -- version and see if the exit value is 0. What we also should do is pass the output. The text here where it says version ImageMagick 7.1 and whatnot. I would love to get a pull request from you, dear viewer, submitting that code, not just checking for the exit value, but for actually, sensible output in addition to the exit value. But for now, we're just going to wing it like that. So the exit value is here, and we already test for magic -- that is version 7. Then we're going to do another call, which is going to be convert -- version. If that works, we're going to we have ImageMagick 6 installed. Other than that, the default is not available. Should we now give that a go? Well, let's go back to our app test class, which, by the way, should also be called ImageMagick test class. And this is, by the way, one thing I want to hammer down into you. For me, coding is more like playing Tetris. If a method is static or if it's not non-static, it doesn't really matter. It's all just, a tiny keyboard shortcut away. Just make sure that constant refactoring is part of your process of writing code. Now, let's run this. Run ImageMagick. Let's see if this works. And yes, it does. ImageMagick is indeed installed. Very cool. Not so fast. Let me just leave one last comment before we move on. We didn't write a really fine-grained test for now. When you look at our detect ImageMagick version method, by the way, let's rename it to detect version, constant refactoring. We kind of, winged it. We said, well, magic-version, then it's going to be ImageMagick 7. We had no way to test for ImageMagick 6 because I cannot install multiple ImageMagick versions onto my machine. Well, I actually could. One way would be to maybe, use Docker containers, or at least, try to find Docker containers with different ImageMagick versions installed. If not, create images with those ImageMagick versions. Then, have a matrix set up in my CI system, run the tests through IM7, IM6, or, run them locally by executing Docker commands. And it's a trade-off I'm making at the moment that I don't want to, set up all this infrastructure for this tiny, tiny piece of code. Now, depending on your circumstances, if you're building the next, banking software, which needs to be, perfect from the beginning, you would actually, spend that effort. For now, for us at the moment, we're just going to leave it like that. And at the end, we'll see that the detection also works on my Ubuntu NAS, and it will detect ImageMagick 6 just fine through manual testing. Yay! All right, back in our test class. Remember, we had our thumbnail creation works test, which we have yet to write, but it should only run whenever the ImageMagick is installed test succeeds. And this is not going to be the only test that will, later on call ImageMagick. In fact, I want to have a general mechanism for, figuring out should we run these tests depending on if ImageMagick is installed. How to do that with JUnit 5? Well, you can write your own annotations. Let me show you how. Let's say this test should only be enabled if ImageMagick is installed. I could have it on a class, I could have it on a method. For now, I need to create the annotation first. And I'm going to paste in a bit of stuff from the documentation. We need to make sure the imports here are right. This is just general annotation stuff, which I'm not going to go into. The only thing that's important is the extend with annotation, because the annotation is just syntactical sugar, so to speak. It's just a marker annotation. When you have the annotation, a condition should be evaluated. This is where the code is that needs to check, is ImageMagick installed? Then yes, run the test, otherwise don't. And we're going to call it enable if ImageMagick installed condition. Let's create it, right? Implement extension. Now, how would we go about implementing this class? Now, you could go and read the JUnit documentation for 5 hours, or I'm just going to show you the code that I prepared. We're just going to wing it a tiny bit. But first of all, instead of implementing extension, what we're going to do is we're going to implement execution condition, which extends extension. Did I say that right? Now, there's one interface method that we need to implement. And here, the condition evaluation result says run the test or don't run the test. So what we could do is I could just say return the result disabled, and with the reason ImageMagick is not installed, like so. And now when I go to my ImageMagick test class, I run the whole class. What should happen is that the first test method is being executed. The second one, yes, you can see it's disabled. That's because, we always return false at the moment. And obviously, we don't just want to return false in the condition. What we want to do is we want to, call detect ImageMagick version, and depending on if it's not available, then it's disabled. Otherwise, it's enabled. Hello and welcome back. We just had a tiny time lapse because the code here for my condition is somewhat ugly. I took it straight from JUnit's documentation or some code samples. I don't remember. Let me just quickly run you through it line by line. In fact, whenever JUnit evaluates the condition, there's just a tiny safeguard. The condition should only be valid in the context of the enabled if ImageMagick is installed annotation, which can be on your test method or on the whole class. So we try to find the annotation. And then we say, if we found the annotation, then we are going to call new ImageMagick detect version. If the version is anything else apart from not available, then the condition is true, meaning the test or the class, the whole class of full of tests will run. Otherwise, the tests will be disabled. And if we don't have the annotation and still evaluate the condition, which won't happen, the default case is, disable the test. That's some great code, isn't it? Let's just run the damn tests. Back in our test class, run ImageMagick test. Yay! And as you can see down here, both tests got executed, right? Meaning our condition works. And that means we can, finally create the final piece of the puzzle, which is, fill out this test here. Let's do it. All right, time to write our final test, our final enemy. What I just did is I downloaded a free stock photo, a photo of the moon, put it under source test resources. And I also added a tiny helper method that allows me to get a reference to that JPEG and actually copy it to any directory that I like. You'll find out in a second why that is needed. Because we want to be good citizens, we want to work with temporary directories that we clean up the file system after all our tests ran, and we can take JUnit's temp directory annotation here. And JUnit will create a test directory for me, make sure it's deleted afterwards after a test so that I don't have to do any cleanup anymore. Now, there's just a couple of things we need to do. First of all, we want to say that we want to copy the test image to our test directory. And then I'm just going to give it the name large.jpg, right? So this is our original image, like so. Then I want to have a reference to the thumbnail that we're going to create. And it should be in test directory resolve thumbnail.jpg, right? And then all we need to do is we call new ImageMagick, and then convert, write that. By the way, that method is still in our app class. We need to change this. So let's just quickly do some more refactoring. It should not be static. It will be here. Public Boolean create thumbnail should now also be in the ImageMagick class. Let's see the related problem. Right in here, new ImageMagick, like so. Just fix the code that we have. Now, inside here, we say ImageMagick create thumbnail, original image, thumbnail. You need the two references, the original file and where the file should be created. And that's literally it. And by the way, for now, what we also could do is we could just extract ImageMagick here. Don't have to make it static final, but like so, right? Now, the big question is, what do we assert? First things first, I don't want to write 20 different tiny test methods that just assert a single thing. For this integration test, what I want to do is have a couple of assertions that make sense together as a whole. And then in assert.j speak, use soft assertions that make sure that test method doesn't just abort whenever the first assertion fails, but it will actually run all the asserts in one place and combine the output. So we have softly assert all here. JUnit, by the way, also has an assert all method. I'm just going to stick with the assert.j API. And then let's think about what would be the cheapest assertion we could do. We could say softly assert that, well, we have a reference to our thumbnail here, thumbnail. It's a file, so I should be able to call exists, right? So the file should actually exist. Up here, it's just a reference, but down here, it should actually exist. And we could check that the file is not an empty file, right? That's nice. I mean, it could now also be a text file. It could be an image of a cat, whatever. But it exists. It's not empty. It's already, where we can start. Now, let's think about the file size. Let's think about my original image is big. Let me just have a quick look. Oh, it's just 460 kilobytes, right? But still, it's fairly large size, and if I reduce it to 300 pixels, we could say that maybe it should be at least half the size, right? It's not a great number, but half the size for now could just potentially work. So what we're going to do is we're going to call file size on our thumbnail, and we're just simply going to say is less than, right? And I'm going to go file size with the original image. Let's say we're going to divide it by 2 to make it real simple for now. And I'm just going to throw an IO exception here because I don't want to handle it. But, as a starting point, let's try it like that. And by the way, now that we're checking for the size here, we can just, remove the is not empty file here. Last but not least, as we're not going to do deep pixel comparisons between scaled images, if you know how to do it, please file a pull request. I would love to see it. But what we could do is we could say that, well, we know that our original image consists of a large amount of pixels. We also know that our thumbnail should only be 300 pixels wide. So we could check for image dimensions, right? So what I'm going to do is just a tiny helper record, actually, for now. We're going to call it public record dimensions. And dimensions consist of an int width and an int height. And then last but not least, what we're going to do is we're going to do an assertion that gets dimensions for our thumbnail. The width is equal to, right? Let me just create that method so I can get auto completion again. We want to return some dimensions here for a thumbnail. We have yet to do that. Is equal to, let's say, 299. We want to see the test fail, right? And then later on the second run, we can actually, change it to 300 and hope that this works. Now, how do we get the dimensions? Easy. I don't want to call ImageMagick now for the dimensions. I want to use some Java-specific API to make stuff much simpler. And that's why I'm just going to paste in some code, which I prepared to make it very simple. We're going to get a new file input stream for our path. We're going to feed that to ImageIO, which is a Java-specific class, which lets you, read images. You get a buffered image out of there, and then we're just going to convert from the buffered image to our own class, to the dimensions class. We're just going to go get width, get height, and if there's an IO exception along the way, we just return -1 for dimensions. Now, this looks, as a first draft, pretty good to me. Let's just run it and see what actually happens. Our test failed. Let's see why it failed. Assertion error expected 299, but was 300. By the way, if you forgot, right, our code, create thumbnail, has hard-coded 300 here. We need to take care of that later on, right? But for now, that is pretty cool, which means when I set it to 300, this actually should just be a green test. Yay, it's green, pretty damn cool. We don't have to do any cleanup because JUnit takes care of that for us. Now, we just call ImageMagick create thumbnail. We assert all these things together for now, which gives us a pretty good idea that our thumbnail creation actually works. If you're a bit like me, by the way, then you just want to see it once on your hard drive, working, not just, in the console. So I'm just gonna, put a debug point here, a breakpoint here. I can see that my thumbnail got created because I'm printing that out on the console. And I'm just going to take that here and feed it into my Explorer. And yay, here is my thumbnail. 300 by 289 pixels wide. So everything really works as expected. Don't be too happy too fast. Why? Because what we just wrote, again, only works on my machine. We have tried out on Windows. We did try it out on my Ubuntu NAS on the CI matrix with the different, Dockerized containers with different ImageMagick versions. And I know that our create thumbnail method still tries to call magick convert, which works for ImageMagick 7. It doesn't work for ImageMagick 6, and we need to change that. So for one, what we could do is we could say every time we instantiate an ImageMagick object, we could, just detect the version. So version equals detect version. So we don't, consistently spawn version commands. And then in here, well, our default command is actually without the magic, like so. And I'm just gonna put all of that into an array list so I can actually change it in a second. That's our default command. But if the version equals version.ImageMagick 7, right? Then what we want to do is default command add. At the very beginning, we want to add magic like so. And then maybe it would make sense to call the command and put it somewhere else. But now I'm pretty fed up with this episode and tons of testing. I want to see through one last piece of manual testing if what we just wrote indeed still works on my NAS, because it works on my machine. But let's check out what my NAS does. And for that, by the way, what I need to do is, for easier deployment for now, I'm just going to move the ImageMagick class back into my app class. So I just have one Java file, which I can now copy onto my machine. Right, so a quick SCP onto my server. And after a quick login onto my server, I'm just going to re-execute the Java command from last episode. Let's see if it works. Look at that. It looks like indeed my program is trying to create thumbnails for photos that it finds. Pretty damn cool. So actually now this finally works and is somewhat tested. All right, to sum up what we just did in this episode, we wrote some tests. We made sure that the thumbnail creation works with a nice little integration test here. We made sure that ImageMagick is installed on my machine, which is, somewhat 80% of the way, because the remaining 20%, as I mentioned a couple of times, will be to run this against, a CI matrix, say a couple of different Docker containers with different ImageMagick versions installed. Only then we could be 100% sure that this actually works. We had to do some manual testing now in my case, because I'm not willing to make that trade-off. I'm not willing to make the trade-off of, installing a CI server now, or, paying for a cloud solution with a free tier. Okay, that could work. But again, it's going to be a couple of hours. We're still in spike mode. We still don't know yet if this project like so will survive. If in the next episode, we're going to completely refactor it. And for now, I'm happy with the tiny piece of manual testing I have to do at the end. The gist of it is that testing in the real world often is a trade-off between, perfect test coverage and just time, money, and effort, frankly. All right, that's enough testing. I'm fed up with it. We need more features. I'm getting into product owner mode again. Let's delete all the tests and just hack out some features. Meaning, in the next episode, what we're going to do is we're going to have a look at our ImageMagick create thumbnail method again. I want to have a look at if at the moment, we sequentially go through all the files and then spawn sequential ImageMagick processes. I want to parallelize, it's a very difficult word to say, the whole process, meaning walking the file tree in parallel, or at least spawning, parallel ImageMagick processes, see if that speeds up things. Along the way, learn a lot about Java threading, executor services, thread pools, and everything about speed and maybe premature optimization, right? Sounds like fun? Then see you in the next episode. Sayonara.